So inside this pretty humongous box should be the worst named Seiko I've ever seen. Now, Seiko isn't known for their great naming schemes, admittedly, but this one takes things to new heights. It's kind of got two code names, so it's known as, on the Seiko UK website, the Seiko 5 Sports SNXS, but SNXS isn't actually the code name. No, that's some sort of homage to an old watch, which I've also got down here. And the actual code name for this watch is SRPK87. Boy, do they like to make it easy for consumers. And this one's also controversial for one big reason, which we'll discuss after we've taken a look at it. Who knows why the box is so big? Oh, look at that. Tell you, Amazon would be proud with the amount of box size. All that for that. Are you joking? So yeah, I bought this one with my own money from Seiko's UK online boutique. There we go. Now, the reason that this watch is so extra controversial is that, as you can tell from the code name, SNXS, this is kind of like a relaunch, a refresh of a previous model. The SNXS series, which I happen to have one of in here, is perhaps the most popular of the previous gen Seiko 5 range, mainly because it looks a lot like the Rolex Datejust, or Oyster Perpetual, should I say. This new one, it does come with some upgrades, but it's also multiple times the cost. And lots of people online, they'll always say, oh, you never pay retail for a Seiko. But as we've seen with lots of the other recent Seikos, they certainly aren't coming down to the prices of the last gen ones, nowhere close in fact. So I paid £340 for this, whereas the last gen one, that's often available for about £100. Admittedly, this one, maybe because this one is launching, this one is getting harder and harder to get. I figured today we could take a look at both of them briefly, see what you're getting, and if this one in any way justifies being multiple times the cost. But yeah, let's get this last gen one open too. Well, last gen one comes in a fancier box, at least a bigger one. How is that possible? A bigger box comes in tiny packaging, and the tiny box comes in a huge piece of cardboard. Here's the last gen one, and this one specifically is the SNXS 77. As you can see from the looks of this, looks a lot like the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. Pretty small watch, 37mm or so wide. Let's have a look. Yeah, just a fraction shy of 37mm. Very short lug to lug, but the reason I don't love this watch is mainly because of the thickness. It's always been the drawback with this particular model. You can see here, the sides are very thin and narrow, which leaves with this huge hump at the bottom. So when the watch is on wrist, as you can see, it kind of hovers, and that's always been the frustration and the reason I've tended to lean more towards the SNK 300 series watches instead. Something like that UFO look. The case is also extremely shiny, as you can see. It's got this super glossy case paired with a brushed bracelet for some reason. So yeah, there is numerous flaws apparently with this watch, with capacity for improvement. Let's take a look at this new iteration of the SNXS. Let's see if they've actually fixed any of those problems. Well, the watch definitely looks higher quality on the surface at least. Here's your first look at it. Unusual as well. This one appears to have a Japanese date wheel. I'm sure it'll be English if I adjust it. Yeah, we're good. So here's your first look at the SRPK version of the watch. And as you can see, it definitely looks higher quality. The case is maybe not thinner, but it certainly has a less protruding rear, and it has brushed flanks this time and a brushed upper with a polished section down the sides. You'll also notice that it's got a domed crystal this time as well, whereas the original version of the watch didn't. Now, there are obvious differences here. I'd say this one is less Rolex-y, mainly due to slight alterations to the handset, and also you've got cream coloured markers and a raised chapter ring, which is also slightly cream toned as well. One thing it does lack is the same sunburst effect dial. This is much more of a matte navy colour, whereas the previous gen, as you can see, had like a blue sunburst, which I personally like quite a lot. Let's get some of these stickers off and take a proper look at it. You know, it's a reasonable watch, but I'm not sure I'd pay more than about 170 for this, even though I did pay 340. Oh goodness. My overall first impressions, at least, are that it's definitely a better made watch than the original, but not by tons. So I've just gone and done the natural light and wife test. She really likes the look of this one, actually. And the watch does look a little bit better in natural light. I don't hate the design. I just think they could have done more with the dial. It's maybe a bit too reserved even for me, and I tend to prefer the reserved styles. Maybe with another strap, this one would pop a bit more. Spec-wise, it has got some improvements. So you got a movement change here to the 4R36 instead of the 7S26. As you can see, there's nothing snazzy going on with the movement finishing. It's still quite bare bones. One major difference is that this one does have much better water resistance, despite looking like they got a very similar rear. So the original only has 3-bar splash proof rating basically, whereas this one has 10-bar, which is much more substantial. Materially though, they're both pretty much the same. This is apparently, even though domed, still only hardlex, even though you're paying over £300 for one of these. I mean, to me, that is just a bit inexcusable. I've got my crystal checker tool here. The Erebus Ascent, which is a really nice and similarly styled watch to this. And that is sapphire, as you can see by the positive reading. Nothing, yep, nothing. So you are getting a bang average crystal at best. The only other notable change is you do get a substantially better bracelet. Now, it is significantly better than the piece of trash that came with the original SNXS. As you can see, it uses solid links throughout, including the end links, and it does have a more traditional clasp with press release buttons. But even then, as you can see, you've only got 2 micro adjustment holes. I always like to see micro adjustment holes that cover more than the range of a full link, although, you know, it's almost like having half a link, so it's not awful in this case because the links are small, but it's still, you know, not the best clasp and also not the best bracelet in general. It's okay. Here's just a closer look at the watch. It does seem to catch reflections quite a lot, although the domed crystals tend to do that more anyway. And there's a super close up. Let's go through the dimensions and then see what it looks like on wrist, see if that redeems it somewhat. 37.4, so it's a fraction bigger than the original, but I like the fact they haven't ballooned the size just because it's a re-release. Lug to lug still seems quite compact, 44.6, and thickness, including the crystal, of 12.5. Without the crystal, it must be about 12, maybe a fraction less, maybe 11.5. So I've wedged it onto my wrist here, and the case definitely looks nicer on wrist, but I wouldn't say that the dial looks any more impressive than the previous one. I have heard that the hands and indexes are, you know, better cut than the original, but from arm's length you really can't tell. And then from a side-on perspective, that's what it looks like. So it's not chunky by any means. It does wear better than the original. So that's where it would sit, and it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. My wrist is 6¼ inches as a reminder. This definitely wears nicer than the original. So yeah, overall, it is a better watch than the original SNXS. Is it like 3 times better, 3.5 times better? Definitely not. Would this watch be worth it if it were, say, 180, 190? Probably, because the case is much nicer and the case finishing is much better. The bracelet is also better, albeit not great. I'm also not convinced this watch needed a domed crystal. I feel like the flat crystal suits the old watch, and I would much have preferred flat sapphire instead, I think. For the amount of money that you spend getting one of these, you can get something quite substantially better. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, I've just been looking at these Erebus Ascent watches, which are literally made by a YouTuber, not a multi-billion-dollar watchmaking corporation. This watch has better finishing in every regard, better bracelets, better movement, so the watch is thinner, a sapphire crystal, nicer hands, custom date wheels. I mean, and it's not just the specs, even though it has got better specs. It just looks like a more expensive watch by quite some margin. So yeah, it'll be interesting to spend some more time with this and review it. So go subscribe to Ben's Watch Club if you haven't already.